Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to the webinar series of Integrating Whole Person Education in Online Environment. This webinar is a joint webinar between Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, Sanata Dharma University, Petra Christian University, Maranatha Christian University, and Duta Wacana Christian University, supported by United Board. Today's webinar is the second series entitled The Design of Online Environment for Teaching and Learning During and After COVID-19. Before we proceed, let me introduce myself. I am Deborah Natalia Sucito from Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. I will be the Master of Ceremony and the moderator in today's webinar. I would like to welcome our precious keynote speakers, Mr. Galvin, Professor Iwan, and Mrs. Martha. Our honorable guest, the representative of United Board, the leaders of the organizing universities, and the alumni of Whole Person Education Academy, cohort 2017 and 2018, and all the participants who joined in this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I would like to invite Joseph Ernest Mambu, Ph.D., the Vice Rector for Institutional Relations and Internationalization, Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, to give the opening remarks as the representative of the organizing committee. Dr. Mambu, time is yours.
Thank you, Buddha. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It's a great opportunity for us to be here, and I believe that it is part of God's will to gather us around here to have the webinar, the second series of the Integrating Whole Person Education in Online Environment. It is my privilege to be here to welcome you all, and specifically, I would like to thank many parties, and on behalf of the committee of this webinar and also the management of Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, I would like to extend my gratitude to my fellow committee members from Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, Budep, Mas Ryan, and some other people. Universitas Sanata Dharma, Universitas Kristen Maranatha, Universitas Kristen Petra Surabaya, Universitas Kristen Duta Wacana Yogyakarta. Without the involvement of the great universities in Indonesia here, it is not possible to conduct this webinar. And the topics of our webinar are based on our informal chat through the WhatsApp or other media. And the student formation, I remember Pa Oda talked about it. And last week we enjoyed the talk on student formation. And Dr. And Father Johnny Go has beautifully expressed or explained how we can form students, whether it is good to have the student formation in online platforms or offline platforms. And yeah, some people are saying that it is good to have the student formation online. Some others say, no, offline is better than the online one. Yeah, and some of the participants say, things being equal, I think it's better to have offline. Yeah, but this is a difficult time. We are facing the global pandemic, and we need to survive educationally with this kind of online everywhere. So the challenge is real. The issue is real, how we can form our students through online environment. Today's webinar will focus more on the design of online environment for teaching and learning during and after COVID-19. And before I go on with my opening remarks, I also want to extend my gratitude to the United Board for Christian Higher Education in Asia, and welcome to Dr. Angela Y. Ching Wong as the Vice President for Programs, and then also Dr. Hope Anthony, Director for Faculty Development, I also noticed that Ms. Sarah Wong is also joining us. It's great to have you all. Without the collaboration between the 5 universities and the United Board, this webinar is not possibly conducted or held twice today. Yeah. Okay, so let me go on a little bit more on the mission of our universities and also the United Board, because the United Board really supports the idea of whole person. And I remember that in the, at least in the website, and also there are whole person education alumni here, a bunch of people who graduated from the whole person education training. We want to develop our students intellectually in terms of academic rigor, spiritually and ethically, where students have concerns on social issues and they inquire, they have moral inquiry. So this is a noble, this is a tall order. It is not easy to achieve this, especially during the pandemic. But I believe that the webinars, and this is the second time for us to have the webinar, will enlighten us to be more involved in developing our students in terms of whole person. And I also have another reference. I have just finished reading Critical Narrative as Pedagogy, written by Ifor Goodson and Sierto Jill in 2014. They also have something to say about the whole person education. According to them, whole person learning involves all aspects of what it means to be human. These include emotions, intellect, moral intuitions, connections, which include self-awareness and sense of identity, connection with others and the world around us, and one sense of aesthetics, spirituality, and actions. So there are many ways of how we make sense of whole person. And I believe that the United Board is part of the global movement to equip our students and teachers to be more knowledgeable about whole person education, especially during the pandemic. It is, again, a really tall order that we can still survive and do the whole person education in whatever ways and means that we can do. So I hope that today's meeting also will inspire us to cope with the difficulties or the struggles during the pandemic and things that might happen after we are finished with the pandemic. So I would like also to extend my gratitude to honorable speakers that will speak today. I will have to mention Mr. Galvin, Professor Iwan Pranoto, and also Ibu Martha Nandari. These people will, these speakers will enlighten us more about the design of online environment for teaching. I don't know much about Mr. Galvin, so I look forward to hearing from you. Or Professor Iwan, I happened to join one of his earlier webinars, and one of the notions that I still remember in my mind is about kasmaran belajar in bahasa Indonesia, or being so much in love or infatuated with learning. The enthusiasm of learning is something that I believe Professor Iwan Pranoto will talk a little bit more on. And when a student is really in the state of flow, it's great. In the state of flow, it's great that we can do whatever we can. We can do the student formation when a particular student is really in the state of flow. Yeah, I believe that Professor Iwan can have something else to say about that. And also Bu Martha, my senior colleague from the same institution. She is a seasoned teacher and teacher educator, and I believe that during the pandemic, she also struggled, but she managed to deal with the classes online. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to return the floor again to the MC, Bu Deborah. Sorry if I have said something that is not appropriate, but I hope that this meeting, again, this webinar will be useful for everyone here. On behalf of the management of UKSW and the committee members, let's enjoy our webinar. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Mambu, for your wonderful speech. Now, all the participants, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a short moment of picture taking. So please open your video and give your best pose. Mr. Ryan will help us to take our picture. One more time. Okay, finish. Thank you very much. Now, before we start the session, let me announce you some information. Please let me share my screen. This webinar is also can be followed by UKSW Live Event YouTube channel. So if you have colleagues that cannot join us in Zoom, you can share it to your colleagues. And the Q&A session will be held after all the keynote speakers talks. So if you want to ask questions, please use the format shown in the screen and post it in the chat room. Each participant is allowed to pose the maximum of 2 questions for each speaker. The relevant questions will be answered by the speakers. At the end of this webinar, there will be exit ticket link. It is for your attendance and e-certificate. So please fill it up later on in the end of this webinar and submit it by August 12 in the afternoon. So now we will start the first session of today's webinar entitled The Design of Online Environment for Teaching and Learning During and After COVID-19. Our honorable speaker in this session is Mr. Galvin Radley L, M.Ed, from Ateneo de Manila University, Philippines. Mr. Galvin has a BA in Communications Technology Management and MA in Educational Administration. He is an instructor at the Education Department and Communications Department at Ateneo de Manila University. He is the Assistant Director and Coordinator for Innovation and Education Technology at Ateneo de Manila Institute for the Science and Art of Learning and Teaching, or SALT. He is also the CEO of Vuca Learning Lab and the Learning Designer CMO Innotech. And he is also the Apple Professional Learning Consultant, the Education Technology Specialist in BEST Program, and he was the facilitator of Media and Technology Application, the Whole Person Education Academy 2017 and 2018. His interests are in professional development, creativity, visual thinking, design thinking, adult learning, technology integration, distance and blended learning pedagogy. Now, please welcome Mr. Galvin Radley. Mr. Galvin, time is yours.
Thank you, Debbie. Allow me just to share my screen before anything else. So I just want to make sure that everyone sees my screen. So if your video is on, maybe give me some signal. If you can hear me and you can see my screen. Yes, great. Thank you. So let me just begin. First of all, good morning to everyone. I'd like to begin with a greeting. I hope I say this right. Selamat pagi for those of you from Indonesia. Magandang umaga if there are some participants from the Philippines, and good morning to everyone else who understands English. So I'll tell you about why I started with the greeting today, which I will reveal at the end of my presentation. But I just wanted to greet everyone first. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity. Maybe before I start my presentation, I just want to say that much like maybe a lot of the universities here, Ateneo de Manila was also caught by surprise by the pandemic, like everyone else, right? And so I guess what I want to say is that what I will do this morning is to share with you the principles that we've been following, how we've been following them so far. But maybe the caveat is they're not perfect. Hopefully today you take them as material for you to reflect on your own context as well. No? So they're not absolute things, they're not biblical in nature, but I hope that they'll be helpful in helping you in your institutions. I'd like to begin with a question, which I think is an important question to think about. At the moment, how would you describe your current situation as an educator or in education? I know that a while ago we talked about the context of the pandemic and how this has really affected our work terribly, you know, in many ways. So I'd like you to think about how you currently feel about this situation, or what best describes this. No? So I'll give you maybe just 5 to 10 seconds to think of an answer. And then if you don't mind, can you go over chat and just type out a word or two about your answer here? No? So how will you describe our current situation in education based on the context that we're in right now, that we're in a pandemic, that a lot of things are uncertain? So sige, I'll give you a few seconds just to post something over chat, and then I'll also look at the chat so that I can see some of your responses. Okay. All right, so I think that people are shy. So if you find yourself answering the question later, just post it over chat. But I think the more important thing is for you to think about this question. Thank you, Alviani, for answering. So sad, yes. Challenging, yes, very much challenging. Forced to look at new ways of teaching. Tiring, yes. I'm teaching a class right now, and I can very much empathize with you. So we'll keep our answers at the back of our heads in this presentation. But what I want to do, sorry, let me just share my screen again. But what I want to do is just to introduce to you a term that we feel really encompasses all of our feelings today. You know? And this term is probably not new to you, most especially in education. We've been talking about this a lot in the past few years. That when we look at our world today, one way to describe it is that it's a VUCA world. It's a world filled with VUCNA, volatility, complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And I think that more than ever, as we face the pandemic, this is really something that is very real to us. This is something that's very real to us. That, for example, in the Philippines, we get announcements about whether we'll be remaining on quarantine every 2 weeks, right? So imagine planning out your life in as an educator or in your classes or in your institution, given these many different things that you'll need to consider. No? So I think this is a good way to describe our common context, that wherever you are, I think in the world right now, it's safe that you're experiencing this volatility, the complexity of the things that we're encountering, the uncertainty of the future, and the ambiguity, and how confusing all of these things can become for us educators, which I think affects how we feel, which affects why we feel challenged, why we feel anxious, why we feel stressed and tired. No? So much like a lot of you, a lot of us felt this way in Ateneo. And one of the problems that we identified early on is this quote over here: "We are building the bridge as we get there." That ideally, if you use the bridge as an analogy, ideally you build a bridge so that people can pass from one place to another, right? But then no one really knew that this pandemic will happen. So we weren't able to really build bridges to be ready for this. And I think that a lot of institutions can probably relate to this experience. And so we have to begin to build the bridge as we actually cross the bridge, right? And I think that's the tricky part in our situation today, that we're all trying things out. Nobody has the absolute right answers because a lot of us have been shoved into this particular context or situation. So in Ateneo de Manila, when we looked at what we are supposed to do or what we at the options in terms of addressing this context, I think this picture summarizes how we initially felt. Like Lego bricks, the many different parts. If you go online, there's a webinar almost every day. There are articles being passed around, research about online learning. There's just so much information that you're not so sure what to follow sometimes. You're not so sure what to actually do. And to be honest, despite the influx of information and sharing, it can be a very paralyzing experience. So for us in Ateneo, we decided to start by articulating what we hope for when we talk about online learning. In Ateneo, we call it the Ateneo Blue Cloud. Our school color is blue, and cloud is just as a symbolism of being on the cloud or being online. And the Ateneo Blue Cloud is really our shared language, philosophy, and framework. So it's a way for us to sort of have a common language when we're talking about what we hope for when we talk about online learning among faculty, with students, and even with parents. So today, this morning, thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to share with you the framework that we're currently using in the Ateneo de Manila University in Manila. It's called Adaptive Design for Learning. This is our way of articulating how we hope to address what learning can continue to be despite the context that we're in right now, and even beyond COVID, which is, I think, part of the theme of the webinars. So why adaptive? If you haven't heard of the word adaptive before, we actually copy this from a term that is used in web design. So I don't know if you've heard of this term before, but the term adaptive in web design actually pertains to the phenomenon wherein a website actually changes form depending on the device that you're using. No? So for example, if you're using a laptop, usually a website is bigger. When you're using a phone, a smaller screen, the website becomes smaller and accommodates to your screen. No? So we thought that this is a good analogy of what we're hoping for. How might we design learning experience that will accommodate these changes? Again, going back to the context that we began our discussion with, the VUCA world, no? That if we accept that things will just continue to change, things will continue to be volatile, uncertain, a lot of changes will happen, a lot of ambiguous things that we'll need to face. How do we adapt? No? What is a good way of adapting? So at the Ateneo Salt Institute and in the university, in the past 3 months, we've been talking about 5 principles. So we articulated 5 principles to really spell out what we think adaptive design for learning can be. Again, this is based on our context, so you might find this different from your context, and that's okay, no? But I hope there might be some things here that will also resonate with you. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is just to walk you through the 5 principles: adaptability, modularity, asynchronous and synchronous learning, the 3 C's of online learning, and active and interactive learning. When we piece these things together, this really paints a picture of how we want online learning to be in Ateneo and how we're trying for it to be. I say we're trying it for it to be because we've already tried to run some courses over the past 6 weeks, our first set of courses, and then we're about to start our first semester. So we started to experiment in actually applying these principles in classes, and hopefully some of my sharing will help you also predict what might happen in your courses if you're not starting yet. So for every principle, I will share with you the design question that we have in mind, and then I'll share with you some examples just so you have an idea as to what we're thinking about. So the first principle is adaptability. And the design question here is, how does your design accommodate the different contexts of students? In Ateneo de Manila, we've clearly decided that online learning is our main modality. But we also know that not all students will be able to participate online, at least participate in the same level, not necessarily because of their own personal capacity as learners, but sometimes because of some external factors like internet connectivity, no internet connectivity for some, working conditions and learning conditions at home, and all of those particular contexts. So the question in principle number 1 of adaptability is, what are things that we need to think about so that when we design, we accommodate all of these particular things, or we consider those particular things. So this is how we approached it. What we said was, when we design for online learning, we can begin with a basic design. What do we mean by a basic design? One of the things that we realized over the past few months is that And I know that seems obvious, but for universities like us who may be just starting to go into fully online learning, this is pretty new, and this sort of surprised us in the beginning, that it really takes some time to really build a good online course. And so we realized that since it takes time to build a good online course, it's actually best to collaborate among the faculty to do it. So in the past 3 months, our faculty has been part of an online course that we actually created about adaptive design for learning. And one of their tasks is actually to work with other faculty from their department to actually come together and create a course together. And I'm not so sure what the culture is in your university, but to be honest, this is not necessarily a default culture or something that we're used to doing. What we're used to is individual faculty members will create their syllabus, will run their courses, and everyone really just goes in their own way. Of course, there's a set curriculum, but then it's very rare that faculty will actually co-design a course. So this is something that's new that we tried out, that faculty who teach the same course will help build the course together. And the advantage of this is really quite practical, that we can assign particular topics to different faculty and everyone can contribute to the building of the course. So we call this the basic design, that maybe faculty can work together in creating a design for the course. But then to make courses adaptable, what we realized is that this basic design should also be supported by low bandwidth versions of either the whole course or some activities. And I'll give some examples later. And maybe we should also make provisions for providing learning packages. So in Ateneo, when we talk about learning packages, we're not talking about printed packages at the moment, unless that's explicitly requested by the student. But what we're talking about are thumb drives, basically, wherein we put all of the course content in the thumb drives, and then we actually send that to students. No? So I'll give you some examples of some practices that we've tried that really articulate or spell out what we mean by the second and the last layer over here. So for example, if you're showing a video in your course, one particular practice that we're endorsing is for teachers to have transcripts, no? So that there's a low bandwidth version, so that students who might have slow internet can choose to actually download the transcript and read that as an alternative to actually watching a video. And this is another example of the thumb drive. No? So this is from Twitter. The student that actually received this posted a tweet about it. This is one of the students that actually requested for the thumb drive version of the whole course. So as you can see on your screen, it's literally a USB drive, and then inside the drive are all of the transcripts, readings, slides, and all of the materials of the course. Of course, the student still needs to coordinate with the instructor, the professor, for the assessments, but this at least gives the student access to the course content. No? So we found this quite helpful for the few students who've actually requested for this. So just to paint a clearer picture of adaptability, so we have the basic design, we have low bandwidth versions, we have learning packages, and then the last and I think important layer is the topmost layer, which we call the contextualized layer. As I mentioned a while ago, most of the basic design will probably be done collaboratively. But then we realize, and I think this is important, most especially from a whole person education perspective, we realize that the voice of the instructor is still very important. No? So even if, let's say, we all co-design a course, we're still giving each other leeway to actually contextualize the content with our own voice. No? So the screen that you're looking at right now actually comes from my personal course. One of the things that I like doing as an instructor is to give examples related to my son. So the picture that you see here is of my 3-year-old son, Asher. And I still continue to do it, no? And maybe my co-teachers do not do it in their courses, but then so that my students can still hear my teacher's voice, I continue to do things that I would often do even in a face-to-face lecture scenario. So that's the invitation, I think, in the topmost layer. Another invitation in the topmost layer is to continue to do things that you feel are important as a teacher in your face-to-face instruction as well. For example, I always start my sessions with a prayer. So even in my modules, I try to include prayers. No? So the screenshot that you see here is an examen that I have my students do in the beginning of one of the modules. So I ask them to literally just pause for around 12 minutes, as you can see on your screen, just to do this guided prayer, and then before they start the module. So I know it looks a little awkward because when we think of modules, we often think of academics, but I think this strikes a balance, and this creates that more whole person education flavor where spirituality is still important as part of the whole learning process. And I just want to share this with you, not to boast about it, but this is one of the feedback I got from students, which I feel really made me affirm that what we're trying to do actually is working, or at least is beneficial for them. I like how the student said here, I have never really felt that the absence of the teacher in this module. And I think that's one of the things that we often try to make an effort in, that even if they're learning online, they don't feel like they're learning from a black box. We want them to feel like they're still learning from the teacher behind that black box, the teacher who actually designed the course or who is interacting with them. Another invitation in the adaptability is actually to make adjustments within the course. And I think this is important, most especially for a lot of us here who have expertise in a particular content area, and we're teaching about this expertise. And the challenge there is usually it's hard to let go. It's hard to let go of things that you don't want students to learn because you feel like everything is important. And I think that's coming from a perspective of expertise, because you know all of these things and you feel like your students should know all of them as well. But then when students actually engage in the course, for example, here, this is the schedule of my actual course now. I had to make adjustments. I realized that my students cannot actually finish my 5 modules. So in the middle of the semester, I had to cut one module out entirely. Of course, I needed to make adjustments in terms of the assessment, among others. But cutting out one whole module, even if that was a very difficult decision for me, really benefited the students because it allowed them the space to actually finish the modules, not to rush through them, to really find time to actually learn through the modules rather than just making sure they finish all of them. So when we talk about adaptability, it's about two things. It's about adaptability in design, making things adaptable, making sure that you consider all of these things, and also adaptability in delivery, that when you actually quote unquote meet your students in an online scenario, you're open to making some adjustments and to contextualize the course to them. So the second principle builds on the first one. This is on modularity. The question that we ask here is, how might we design bite-sized content? So I think bite-sized content is important right now, because when you think about our learners today, and sometimes even us, right? A lot of conversations, I'm sure you've been part of a lot of conversations about how the attention span is now shorter and shorter and shorter. And most especially in an asynchronous learning scenario, you're banking on a student's self-management. So one way to make sure that you don't overload them is to design things in bite-sized content. But the second thing in bold here is quite important, that when you design bite-sized content, there are opportunities for feedback. So what does modularity look like? So the concept of modularity is really a shift from a whole course design to designing in modules, or a shift away from the teach now, test later perspective. What do I mean by this? Even as an instructor myself, I usually do the whole course design, meaning I design my whole course as a semester, for example, and then usually all of my assessments are at the end. That's why teach now, test later. But what I realized when we had to shift to the quarantine mode is that when that happened to us abruptly last semester, all of my major assignments were not done, and we had to just cancel it. And so foreseeing these changes, I think, is quite important. And one of the reasons why those changes were hard for us to do is because we were thinking in a whole course design. So what does it mean to do modular design? When we talk about modular design, what we're thinking of is to design courses by breaking them down into discrete, meaningful chunks, modules, and to have checkpoints in every module, so that it's very clear to you that even if, let's say, after module 1, you have to shift to a blended learning mode, it's quite easy to move around things because you've been able to group your course into subgroups of modules already. What does it look like? If we describe it, this is what it looks like, that modules are often framed by competences. These are often your learning outcomes and evidences of learning or assessments. And I'd like to emphasize evidences of learning because we strongly believe that most especially in online learning, learners should be presumed innocent of learning until they are proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt. No? That even if they are going through the modules, there's nothing assuring us that they're actually learning. So we have to begin to shift from an attendance mindset to an assessment mindset, that we use assessment as a proof of learning rather than attendance. Some of us might be thinking, how will I check if students are actually going through the pages of my modules or reading the things that I ask them to read? Those are important questions, but I think the more important question is, how will you make sure that they're actually learning, right? And even if you're not able to answer the first question about attendance or about going through the modules, if you can see that learning is happening, I think that's okay. I think that should be okay. So what does it look like in an actual course? This is again from my course as an example. So we articulate our learning outcomes. I think in a lot of syllabi, this is how it looks like. And then one of the things that we did in our syllabus was to revise it so that we can also reflect how the modules align to the particular learning outcomes. And students can see this so that it's very clear to them that when they're taking module 1, the goal is always towards course learning outcome number 2, 4, 1, so on and so forth. And we also did the same with talking about our assessments to make sure that our assessments are also aligned to our learning outcomes. And again, although this may not be exclusive to online learning, this is very helpful in an online learning scenario because it creates more transparency between the teacher and the student. No? So it's very clear to them what the outcomes are and how what we're asking them to do actually leads to the outcomes that you have set for them. No? So the next principle is asynchronous and synchronous. No? So, and I know that these terms are probably not new to everyone here, that when we talk about online learning, it's really about designing or choosing from asynchronous and synchronous activities. And the driving question here really is, how do we intentionally design what goes to the asynchronous and what goes to the synchronous activities? And I'd like to emphasize here intentionally design, because I think that as we shift to online learning, there could be a tendency just to translate. No? For example, in face-to-face where we lecture. So sometimes we think that since we lecture in face-to-face, that should be done synchronously, just because it's done in face-to-face. So there is a tendency sometimes to think that face-to-face and synchronous are the same. So we need to sort of nuance our understanding of that. So these are some examples of asynchronous and synchronous activities that often happen in a course. Individual readings, watching, listening, online discussion, assignments. These are asynchronous activities in a module. And you, of course, you have live chats, video conferences like this as synchronous activities. What has guided us is really research. That what we found in research about synchronous and asynchronous activities is this, that asynchronous activities are actually better for cognitive types of activities. If you want students to actually digest particular information, conceptualize things, absorb new kinds of concepts to them, because that really takes a lot of reflection and time. So that's usually better allocated to asynchronous activities. While synchronous learning is actually a better scenario or a better learning environment for personal participation, right? Motivating students, creating relationships with them, brainstorming with them, planning with them. And so when we design our courses, we also try to keep this in mind, that we actually favor asynchronous learning in Ateneo, mainly because of equity, so that students who have lower bandwidth will be able to catch up, will be able to do it at their own pace. But apart from that, also pedagogically, because we know that in terms of understanding new content, asynchronous learning experiences are favored. No? So this is a sample schedule of my class wherein they're mostly asynchronous, as you can see, but I do have 3 synchronous sessions within a course of around 6 weeks. So this particular class ran for 6 weeks. We also make sure that we articulate the learning time so that students know what to expect. So this is an example of the agenda of some of my synchronous sessions. I usually have some getting to know you activities, I don't go straight into content, again, because I know that students also miss that personal interaction, and I'm sure that you also miss it. I personally miss it as a teacher as well. So if we want to get to know our students, the synchronous sessions really are great ways to get to know them, most especially if they can afford to show their camera, you can see their face, you can interact with them, and you could also create interactions among them, no? Which can be done asynchronously and synchronously as well. So what are things that we consider when we judge asynchronous and synchronous? We usually look at three things: learner's access, learner autonomy. To what extent can you leave them on their own? For example, how we might treat a graduate class might be different from an undergraduate class, and the task that you hope for learners to do. So down to my last two principles. The second to the last principle is active and interactive learning. And the driving question here is, how do we design engaging and empowering learning activities, not just content? No? And I think this is important because when we think about online learning, sometimes this is what happens. No? Sometimes we run into the danger of dumping content. I have 10 readings. I will post them all in my learning management system, and I will have students just read all of these things, and I'll give them a quiz. I'll ask them to watch 5 YouTube videos or 10 YouTube videos, and then I'll give them a quiz after. Um, I think we know that that's not necessarily teaching. The teaching is really being able to facilitate this learning experience, not just dumping content on them. So this principle is a reminder to design explicitly and generate an experience, not just to dump content, for students to actively participate, not just to receive content. No? So some of the keywords that we use are things like, we want students to investigate, to create, to collaborate, to contemplate, to reflect, and to communicate their learning. No? How have we been trying to do this? Online discussion forums is a basic tool that we've been using, so that we can engage with students. And this has been effective in terms of getting them to reflect on the content that we present in the learning management system. We've also tried to use some tools like Edpuzzle. So Edpuzzle is a video annotation software tool wherein you can insert a video and then the video will pause so that you can ask questions in between. No? So it becomes a more active and interactive learning experience for students. If you're assigning them reading assignments, we've found this particular tool helpful. It's called Perusal. Perusal allows you to upload a PDF document and to have discussions on the side about parts of the document. So for example, you can highlight parts of the document and ask students questions about different parts of the document. So it can become a more engaging experience for students, despite the fact that it's simply a reading assignment. So the intention, I think, of active interactive learning in a way is really to slow down the teaching for better learning. For example, the screenshot that you see here is from one of my modules. As you can see, I have a lot of activities. To be honest, I could have just done a 30-minute lecture about all of these things. But instead, I opted to come up with a set of activities so that students will really get things bite-sized, will really have time to process things, not just to skim, not just to make sure they watch the video, but to really make sure that it gets them to learn, gets them to absorb the information and reflect on the information and content that I'm presenting. So it's really a shift in thinking of what the students will do, not just what the teacher is doing. I know that a lot of us can sometimes feel obsessed about how we present ourselves to students, even in an online format. I've seen a lot of teachers who've bought ring lights, set up their space so that when they take videos of themselves, it's nice. I think that's important and that's helpful. But then hopefully we move beyond that. And I think that's what this principle reminded us of, that hopefully we think of the learning experience. So not just content creation, but designing active and interactive learning experience for our students. Now, the last principle is called the 3 C's of online learning. And this is where we say, we hope that good online learning strikes a balance between 3 things: content, coach, and community. Content is basically about the learning materials and learning activities that you have students engage with in your course. But then more importantly, we talk about coach, which is your instructor presence, how present you are inside the course, and community, the importance of involving other classmates and collaboration as part of your learning experience. One way of looking at it is to compare the 3 C's or an online learning situation with the 3 C's with remote teaching and remote self-study. Remote teaching are occasions wherein we just do purely synchronous sessions and then we just teach our students. So it's always about you, the teacher, and the content. There's nothing wrong with that, but we feel in Ateneo that that's an incomplete picture of what's possible in online learning. On the other hand, there are situations wherein we ask students to do just purely remote self-study, right? These are 10 activities, do it on your own and learn on your own. And as if you use the three C's as a language, this is very much just focused on content. There's a mere absence of coach and community. So what we're hoping for is to strike a balance that this is one of the guiding principles we have in online learning, that whatever it is that we plan and actually facilitate for students, hopefully there's a good balance between content, well-designed content, the presence of a teacher, a coach, and opportunities to work and collaborate with each other in a learning community, which is often their particular class. So here are some examples just to concretize this particular principle. Replying to discussion forums is a basic way of making the coach available. I know this can be tiring, so sometimes you don't actually need to reply to each one. A strategy that we tried out is called weekly digest. No? So for example, I have 23 students. Everyone answers the discussion forum at a different time. No? So it's impossible to just wait for them to answer. It's not as if that's the only thing I do. So what I often do instead is sometimes if I can't answer to everyone, I make sure I read everyone's entries and then I send a weekly digest to everyone. No? So in the weekly digest, I take this as an opportunity to clarify misconceptions, to point out some key ideas that have emerged in the discussion, so that the students will feel like you're listening, and at the same time, the presence of the instructor to clarify misconceptions, to help them understand better, to help them fine-tune their understanding is still felt despite the fact that you're not able to give a 1:1 reply. So we found this quite helpful. Consultation hours is something that we mandate among our teachers, our faculty, that we have to provide consultation hours where students can actually set appointments with us individually and they can consult with us. To be honest, no one has reached out to me. So sometimes you have to prod students too and just remind them that this is available, so that if there is a student who actually needs help, you'll be around for them. And finally, in terms of making community available, these are some strategies that we've tried out. Asking students to reply to each other in asynchronous discussion forums. That's one strategy that we've been doing a lot. And in synchronous sessions like this, for example, using tools like Zoom, we have them work in breakout sessions. And students like this because they get a chance to talk to each other as well. And in my graduate class, a lot of them expressed early on in the course that this is something that they miss in online learning. The opportunity not just to hear from the teacher and have conversations with the teacher, but also the opportunity to learn from their classmates and to actually hear and see their classmates. No? So synchronous sessions are great venues for things like that. So when we look at the five principles of adaptive design for learning, and maybe when we make a clearer connection with whole person education, I'd like to think that, and hopefully, as I was explaining, you did have a sense of this. Um, the foundation of all of these principles is really what is best for the student. The foundation of all of these principles is really to think about what is important to consider so that students will have equitable access to the content. Students will have a good learning experience, not just based on what the teacher knows, but based on the context of each particular student. So I'd like to end with a greeting. So we started with the greeting, and I'd like to end with a greeting that I think just reminds us of the big picture, of the key message rather, that is behind everything that we actually do also in our work in Ateneo. I think that as we move into online learning, this term really encompasses what we really hope for. I don't know if you've encountered this term before. It's called sawubona. Sawubona is a greeting in Africa by the Zulu tribe, and when they meet each other, they greet each other with sawubona. And when we translate sawubona, it actually means we see you. The community sees you. I see you. And I think that when we talk about what we desire for online learning, hopefully this is our ultimate desire, that students will feel like we see them, and students will feel like they see us as well, despite the limitations of distance, despite the limitations of the online learning environment. So thank you very much. And I hope that the presentation has helped you think about how online learning can be in your institutions.
Thank you very much, Sir Galvin, for your inspiring session. Thank you for sharing with us those principles. I believe that all the participants get new insights here, and I hope all the participants can contemplate and then apply it in their daily conversation with the students. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to share to question, you can post in the chat room now for Sir Galvin sessions. And we will proceed now to the second session. Another wonderful speaker is here now. We have the second session entitled The Design of Online Environment for Teaching and Learning During and After COVID-19 in Indonesia Context. In Science and Mathematics Point of View. And we will have now our honorable speaker in this session, Professor Iwan Pranoto, Ph.D. from Bandung Institute of Technology. Professor Iwan took his bachelor degree in mathematics, Bandung Institute of Technology, and then continued his master degree and PhD in mathematics on University of Toronto, Canada. He is a professor of mathematics, faculty of mathematics and natural sciences, Bandung Institute of Technology. He has more than 20 years of expertise and experience in mathematics education from primary to university levels. He is mathematics education consultant and trainer in government and non-government institutions. He was a trainer of Southeast Asian mathematics teachers through the quality improvement of teachers and educational personnel in mathematics, or KITEP in math, under Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, CMEO. He was the chair of the Center of Innovation and Policy of Math and Science Education, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, and he was the Education and Cultural Attaché in New Delhi, India, for developing education and cultural collaboration, both Indonesia, India, and Indonesia, Bhutan. His interests are in general mathematics, geometry, and mathematics education. So now please welcome Professor Iwan Pranoto. Professor Iwan, time is yours.
Thank you. Oh, wait a minute. I have to. Wait. Greeting everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me and to talk about this important issue. And of course, thank you so much for Mr. Galvin for explaining a very elaborate situation about our education, our present education situation. And I will talk perhaps something else, and I will talk about the whole person, about the concept of whole person, and I think it is becoming more apparent in this situation, in this pandemic crisis, becoming clearer what our problem is. It becomes clear, and it becomes transparent what our problem. Okay, I will share with you my presentation, and I think the organizer have my presentation slides. So if you need the slide, you can approach the organizer. Fine. This is my presentation about the whole person education, but how to do it remotely. So the picture here is actually it's the representing the two cultures that I will talk about today, and the on the left is actually the science and technology culture. On the right is humanity culture. And I think when we talk about whole person, this balance of cultures, the two cultures, I think also important to talk about. So I will start my presentation. Some define whole person education as the environment that supports every student to develop her or himself intellectually, spiritually, and ethically. And this is the approach I think global world education using. So it is important to see that the one who develop the in their intellect, the student intellectuality and spirituality and ethic are the students themselves. So this education we have now only provide the environment, provide the atmosphere, so the students can develop their characteristic, their characters, their personality, and so on, and ability and competence. Now, this is one way to see what is whole person education. Another one is I refer to the one whole person education from Georgia Tech, and it is based on 3 pillars. The one is cognitive, and the other one is interpersonal, and the last one is intrapersonal. So the thinking skill, it's important part for whole person education, and I totally agree with this. That's critical thinking and analytical thinking. I think it is important in this time. And then interpersonal becoming more and more important because we are connected, even though now we are connected virtually, but still we are connected. So the interpersonal skill are important. And the next one is intrapersonal, and this also an integral part of the whole person education. So education means that how we allow the student to optimally develop their cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So that's by Georgia Tech. And the next one that I will talk about, perhaps this is more that I argue this is important, or perhaps more important. Yeah, this is the fact that now we use technology. We use technology in our life, and actually, algorithm rules our life now. In everything, in every kind of things now, algorithm rules our life now. But there is an important it's interesting news in the beginning of 2020 when European Union makes move to ban the use of facial recognition systems. So what is the argument? The reason experts want to restrict this system. Why? Because they say that error-ridden, invasive, and this is important, in the wrong hands, it will be authoritarian. So it will disturb the privacy of the people. So this actually the problem. The problem nowadays problem. This is the really 21st century problem. That's actually the science and technology able to monitor people, but the humanity saying privacy is important. So there is a lack of communication between science and technology culture, saying I can make that, I can make application that can monitor the movement of people, but on the other hand, the humanity saying that wait a minute, that's dangerous because it will destroy the privacy. So this is the situation, and this actually already stated by C.P. Snow 60 years ago. So on the left is the picture on the left is actually C.P. Snow. It's actually a chemist, but also a novelist. And his lecture was a very well-known one. The title is The Two Cultures. And actually, he stated that the lack of the communication between science tech culture and humanity culture makes many problems, world problems, cannot be solved because of this lack of communication. So in 1959, that's the situation. He talked about that one. But now the situation, it's not only that. It's not only that we cannot solve many problems because of the lack of communication between the science tech culture and humanity culture, but we actually that lack of communication between these two cultures creates greater problems. This is really fresh from this 21st century age. And we can see that intolerance, hoax, tribalism, polarization, political divide, racism, hatred, all of them actually can be seen as the result from the lack of communication between these two cultures. So that's why I think whole person education must also look at this situation, this new situation. So the whole person education must guarantee, must acknowledge, must make sure that these two cultures can grow together and in harmonious way. And this is in 2014 actually, President of Estonia. This is the first digital republic. Thomas Hendrik Alves. Now he's the professor in Stanford after finishing his presidency. He's saying this, that geeks and techies rarely think about the ethical and political implication of their product. So geeks and techies just saying, I can make it. I can make the movement monitor for people. Okay, that's possible. And perhaps now geeks and techies can make monitor for the movement of the people with who are in fever because of the COVID, for example. That's possible. But on the other hand, politicians, law, and policymakers often lack the basic skills to even understand how technology works. So this is the situation. The geeks do not care about humanity, and the law policymakers do not understand about the technology. So this is situation now really create the problem that we see now. Then actually democracy becoming in great danger because of this situation. So for example, we allow algorithm to influence people in the election now. So this is I think it's a very our democracy is in the fragile position now, because our law could not understand how the algorithm allowing the algorithm to influence people politically. And that's what's happening now through the social media, because the algorithm can target certain people to listen to certain news, to certain politics. So that's the political ideas. So that's the situation. In my opinion, this is we must understand this. We must incorporate this situation into our education. So whole person education must answer these problems. And in 2020, the situation, this must be incorporated into the pandemic crisis in mind. So the solution must include the crisis, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic crisis in this design. So this is the challenge for us in education sector. But what we have learned from this past 6 months is actually the learning setting. Actually, first is, of course, actually the technology is not the infrastructure. The internet infrastructure, for example, was not good enough. In particular, for remote areas, the technology not there, the infrastructure not there. The student and teachers, the teachers who use e-learning technology before the pandemic, it's only 9% less than 9%. And the student who use the e-learning technology, only 1%, less than 1%. So when we must move to remote learning setting, then it's not ready. Now, of course, it's the situation. It will not be so difficult. It's not troubling if our students have learning culture. If they have the passion to learn, if they have the skill to learn, then that's not really big problem. So the teacher perhaps can send offline through the learning material. If the students have the learning culture, so that's not too difficult. The learning activities will continue. The student will learn. So it's not a big problem. But unfortunately, we realize now that in the past, our education do not provide, do not put stress on the importance of learning culture. Now we see the result. We see the impact because of our lack of learning culture. We did not nurture the learning culture. Now we see the big problems in our remote setting. Distance learning becoming very difficult, and students saying it's not good. I don't like this setting because one of the video I saw saying that I did not enjoy this distance learning because after I sign my name and then I sleep, because so I didn't learn. Well, that's the problem. It's not the problem of the education, of course, of the distant learning, because in distant learning we assume the student have the passion, assume the student have the learning skill, but that's not the case. So this is the big challenge, I think, how we adopt this situation into our design. Therefore, we have to design the remote or perhaps minimally in-person instructions, and how to deliver the knowledge, the skill, how to develop the skill, how to develop the attitude, and how to nurture the value. And this is the question that I think the technology is there. So in my opinion, what Mr. Galvin already explaining in great detail, I think the technology already there. So it's not a problem at all for the technology. We can utilize the technology. How to deliver the knowledge, how to help the student develop the skill, how to help the student learn the attitude and value. So that's the situation. Now, the knowledge, but we have to realize now, knowledge is already in everyone's pockets and it's accessible 24/7. So it's totally different from perhaps 30 years, 3 decades ago. The knowledge is not in everyone's pocket. Now we can see whatever we want to know. We can check our cellular phone and we can find it. Okay. And the next one, we have to know the fact that production of knowledge is not centralized in university anymore. Even a company have their own laboratory, their own research center, so they produce knowledge as well. And sometimes, in my opinion, the knowledge produced in industry are more advanced than the ones in the university. So for example, if you want to learn searching algorithm, for example, the question is, you want to learn in Google or you want to learn in Stanford or MIT? Well, that's very hard question, because I think Google can provide you knowledge more about searching algorithm. Okay. And the next one, dissemination of knowledge is not only through in-person interaction anymore. Now, most of the knowledge dissemination done through internet. So in knowledge situation, it's different. Okay. And the next one, and this is the new fact that we understand, and science, statistic, and digital and other literacies are important. In particular, science literacy, it's just a flaw. We can see that lay people do not want to use math. Many lay people do not want to use math. So it's a sign, it's a clear indicator that science literacy is not successful enough. So we have to do more in this one. The next one, skill. The skill, thinking critically, creatively. So the question is how we help our student, we assist our student to develop their thinking capability, and this remotely. And I think this is, as discussed before, in my opinion, asynchronous approach is the one that must be the approach that we have to take. We cannot rely only on online, because thinking is always slow. Thinking is always thinking cannot be rushed. So we have to do it slowly. So in a way, asynchronous thinking must be done contemplatively. It must be done, it's not in the synchronous setting. But communicating through various media, this is now becoming important, and communicating through various media is through video, through audio, this kind of communication skill that's needed now. And the next one, first is because the global world becoming of the pandemic, for example, we can see that the nation somehow in the beginning of the pandemic, we can see the country only take care of themselves. It's like the globalization fails. But now we can see that that's not the case, because we cannot solve the situation, the global pandemic, by our own. We can do it globally. So intellectual humility is the one that important, because in my opinion, in the past, education always stress on the competence, on the performance of the intellectual performance, but not intellectual humility. And this become creating intolerance because of the situation now. Our students, our people do not have the tolerance of ambiguity and uncertainty. The people, the society always see that different from me is wrong. Okay, that situation, that the whole person education, I think it's a good time for us to raise this issue. Okay, and the values becoming more important is the interconnectedness and the diversity, uniqueness, and integration. These are the values that I think remote education must stress them. And so my essential point that I think we have to focus on. Let's focus on the technology, because the technology is there. It's ready. It's available. But we have to focus on safety now, and humanity and trust. I remember that the question, the exam used to be secrecy, and that's because we did not allow using technology for learning. But now we cannot guarantee that the student do not use Google, do not use Wolfram Alpha, do not use MATLAB, and so on. So what we have to ask is, the exam question must be those that cannot be solved by Google. You have to create question, formulate the problem, so it require that student to do thinking and contemplation in a great way. Okay, and then the next one is essential. Now it's learning is becoming personal experience because of technology. Now student, if find difficulty in the following lesson, then they can adjust the experience, the learning pace. And the gamification is also important. We must use this in particular in the beginning of the semester, because learning for some students who did not have experience before on online learning, they are not they are stressful of this. So we have to create the situation in the beginning of the semester must be very enjoying. Okay, and then values. We have to stress on the values. That's my last slide. Thank you so much, Miss Debbie. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talks, Professor Iwan. I believe that all the participants also will think more about what you talked a while ago. Thank you very much, sir. Now we will proceed to the last speaker, but not least, I would like to introduce her to you all. The third session is entitled The Design of Learning Environment for Teaching and Learning During and After COVID-19 in Indonesia Context, from Humanities, Liberal Arts, and Social Sciences point of view. So we will have now our honorable speaker, Martha Nandari Santoso, M.A. from Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. Mrs. Martha took her bachelor degree in English education from Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana and her MA in Applied Linguistics, National University, Singapore. She is a senior lecturer in English Language Education Program, Faculty of Language and Arts, Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. She was the Vice Dean of Faculty of Language and Arts, Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. She was also the manager of the Bureau of Promotion and External Relations, and she was the Vice Rector of Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. Her interests are in authentic learning, multicultural communication, multimodality, and innovative teaching and learning. So now please welcome Mrs. Martha Nandari Santoso. Mrs. Martha, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Debbie. Hi, everyone. Let me now share my slides first. Okay, so in my session, I will talk about my teaching reflection this semester during the pandemic. And I use technological tools that are very familiar to my students already, and also that are familiar for me. And I use, for the methodology, I use a humanistic approach. So title from my presentation is an online environment design for using a humanistic approach for whole person education using a humanistic approach. The aim is to exemplify an online environment design for whole person education using a humanistic approach. And my presentation structure, so I will start with context, and then I would give just small survey results on useful technological tools for online environment that I conducted at my faculty. And then humanistic approach in education, an example of an online environment design for whole person education using a humanistic approach, and then students' opinions, conclusion, and recommendations, and then references. So let me now start with the context. To illustrate my presentation, I used two of my courses, critical reading class and professional narrative writing class. The students or participants are 32 first-year students of the English Language Education Program, Faculty of Language and Arts, Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. And they are more female, 20 female and 12 males. And if you look at the student demography, most of my students actually are from Salatiga or Central Java. Salatiga is the city where Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana is located. And then the second majority are students from Borneo or Kalimantan. And then there are also few students coming from West Java, Maluku Island, and Madura Island. And you know that during the pandemic, all of the students, or most of the students that are from out of town, they return to their hometown. And especially I noticed that my students coming from Maluku and also Kalimantan, they live in villages. So I realized that my students actually have different technology and digital literacies. That's the context. And then the technological tools that I use, so for my immediate online class, I use the less stressful ones to ensure that learning happens. So my choice of technology fell to the use of Schoology. Why I use Schoology? Because all of the students, starting from first semester, they are introduced to Schoology. So this is a familiar learning management system for all the students. And then I also use Facebook because all of the students already have Facebook accounts. And then I also use WhatsApp group for the more immediate communication mode. Everybody also in my class has WhatsApp accounts. And then I also use YouTube for the supplementary material. And also for giving quizzes, for giving exercises, and for playing games, yeah, I use quizzes. This is also a useful tool. These tools actually are among the 30 useful technological tools based on my survey results. So based on my survey results in my faculty, there are 17 participants. The highest is like WhatsApp email, so everybody use them for, especially for preliminary communication. And then Google Meet, Schoology, and Zoom, they are for the, I think for the synchronous communication, and also other tools like this. I'm not going to discuss one by one as I'm not also an expert in this. And as for the teaching methodology, I was very much influenced by the humanistic approach. The ultimate goal of education based on humanistic approach is self-actualization. So learners can realize what they desire or what they really want to be. Humanistic approach is rooted from personality psychology and introduced by scholars like Maslow and Rogers. And based on these theories, teachers create a learning atmosphere that is non-threatening to enhance learning. So humanist teachers are non-judgmental. Humanists believe that by being non-judgmental, they can encourage students to learn and grow. Humanistic approach stresses a learning environment which minimizes anxiety and enhances personal security. If students feel hostile towards the subject of the study, the materials, or the teaching methods, they will be unlikely to achieve success. Okay, and based on the theories of humanistic theories, there are changing roles of a teacher. So from a notion dispenser, from transferring knowledge, you know that teacher is now not the sole source of knowledge, becoming a facilitator to facilitate learning. And from teaching to learning. So the important thing is not to supply knowledge, but to direct the students to learn how to learn. So learning to learn is important. Besides Maslow and Rogers, humanistic approach is also rooted in Paulo Freire's ideas. The pedagogy of the oppressed. This is very famous. So, and his criticism to education through his ideas in pedagogy of the oppressed, he said that like the banking, he called it the banking concept of education. So the students' minds are like saving accounts in which the teacher makes deposits. According to Freire, education thus becomes an act of depositing in which the students are the depositories and the teacher is the depositor. and makes deposits which the students patiently receive, memorize, and repeat. So the banking concept of education is students are only receiving, filling, and storing the deposits. Freire's ideas on humanistic approach is also like democratization of the learning process and critical ideas or critical thinking. Education is embedded in democracy and practice of freedom. And characteristic of the teaching methods of humanistic approach are problem solving. So here, the student is actually also the teacher and the teacher student. So the student is also the teacher, and then the teacher is also students. So they have power sharing relationship. So there is collaborative learning. And then another characteristic is dialogues. So teacher asks questions, exposes students to the world rather than supplying answers or defining the world. And then the next characteristic is praxis, that is reflection and action that is done repeatedly. So there is no final act of knowing. So knowing is growing and there is no act of knowing. So that is why we cannot become a knowledge dispenser, because it is very dynamic. The implications of humanistic approach in the classroom. So about student-teacher relationship, student and teacher, or teacher is also student, and students are also teachers. So there is a sharing of power. And then student-teacher should have rapport, good and close relationship. And then teacher and students have dialogic relationship. So teacher is not the only is not the sole learning resource for the students, but there is a shift from teaching to learning, and teacher only facilitates learning. And the learning atmosphere, it should be non-threatening, but warm and encouraging. We should have trust and respect to the students. And as for the topics, there should be positive topics. So for example, in my writing class, actually a topic such as my saddest experience, according to humanistic approach, it is not recommended. It is okay to write about a sad experience, but it must be said in a positive tone. So for example, one of my students in writing class, she wrote that when she was 5, her mother passed away. And she was often bullied by her friends for not having a mother. But she managed to see the positive side of it. And she ended the story writing, I do not have a mother, but I have a very loving and caring father. So that is what positive topic is like. Yeah. And then topic should also be meaningful. To me, to be meaningful means authentic topics. So topics that the students are likely to experience or need in their real life situations. And then learning activities. The learning activities can be in dialogues or mostly discussions in my class, and then problem-based projects, collaboration or group work, and praxis or reflection and action. So honestly, during the pandemic, I seldom have synchronous meeting with lecturing, but I do more discussions, giving projects, collaboration, group work, and also reflection and action. And the classroom application. So in my class, for example, this is just an example. So the steps is first I create a course on Schoology and then share the course code to the students via the official student email. So every student has a student email. So it's very easy that to contact them in the preliminary communication. And then after that, I create a WhatsApp group. This is for the more immediate communication. And I also use WhatsApp group for video call for group consultation. And then number 3, I create a Facebook closed group and invite members. So in a Facebook closed group, only the teacher as the administrator and the students as members can see the activity in a Facebook closed group. So talking about privacy is private enough in the sense that only the members in the group can see the activity in Facebook closed group. And then what can Facebook do for an online class? So actually there are many features that we can use on Facebook. Especially I created a Facebook closed group. So we can upload files like PowerPoint, videos, pictures. We can also use the discussion forum here for the comment session for discussion. And then there is also a feature create poll, and I use create poll for pairing or grouping the students. And then there is also live video. So whenever I need to explain, like talk about a difficult topic, I would use the live video. And when I need to have interaction with the students live with face, yeah, like a Zoom, there is also a feature like create room, but the capacity is only limited to 20 people, but it's enough for my class. And well, in Zoom, you have breakout room. On Facebook, whenever I want to have a group discussion, I would create different walls. So students in their group can communicate in that wall, especially for that group. And then there is also a feature of watch a video together and create an event. But I think create an event is not relevant now during the pandemic. And as you see here, actually you can also schedule posts. So whenever we can also post something pre-advance. So to me, it's very convenient to use this social media. Okay, now my activities. For building rapport with the students, I always start like the first 10 minutes of my class to say hi, to greet one another like this. I post in Facebook, hi students, good to see you again, how are you? And then they will respond. And they will also interact one another saying about their well-being. I think this is important because students during the pandemic, they sometimes feel isolated. So it's good if they can still, they feel that they are connected to other people. And I would also give an example here taken from my colleague's class, Miss Inanu's class. She used Padlet. Yeah, this is also a tool, a very interesting tool. So she used Padlet for introduction. So on the first day during the pandemic online class, she asked all of the students to post their pictures and also to give introduction, to say hi to one another. This is good, especially if we deal with new students when they do not know one another already, they do not know the teacher. So I think this is good that you can have some kind of introduction like this at the beginning of the class. Okay, and then characteristic of humanistic approach is respect and trust. You know that I posted this on the wall of our class Facebook group. The situation is that I asked the students to have uploaded their work before class. But about 30 minutes before class began, I noticed that some of them have not done it. So instead of saying like, hi students, upload your storyboard soon, it's almost deadline. I wrote something like this. Hi everyone, I can't wait reading and watching your revised storyboards. Upload them now or upload them soon. Well, I know that probably if this is shorter and probably effective, especially if we say like your score will be deducted if you submit late, for example. I know that score reduction is also effective, but it is an external motivation and it has temporary effects only. If students feel the teacher's enthusiasm in their work, such as when we say, I can't wait reading and watching your storyboards, they will feel appreciated and they are likely to work more seriously. And then another principle of humanistic approach is empowering the students. Have dialogues, learn from one another. So the situation here is that when I posted this, some students complained they felt uploading their rather long storyboards in a form of video on Facebook because I asked them to upload their storyboards. And then there were two friends who had succeeded posting their long video. So I asked the two friends here, student A and student B, to share their experience. Hi, A and B, you managed uploading a long video of storyboards. Please share. Your friends need your advice. And you know that they were very happy. Yeah, and then they said that, oh, maybe you have not, maybe you did not have good internet connection because yesterday my connection was also low and I failed. Maybe you need to save your file so that it become smaller and something like that. And the slides on the right here, I asked them to, class, read and watch your friends' storyboards. You may learn from them and they may learn from you. Comment one another. So this is to encourage students to learn from one another. And then related to authentic materials, I try to use topics that are familiar or that they are likely to meet in their daily life. So the class material here was in my reading class, it is predicting skills for reading. So I asked the students to find captions of newspaper articles that they were interested in and ask questions as to predict the content of the article from the question. So I asked them to upload or to post the caption of the article and then let the other students, because they have read the article, and ask the other students to make questions as to predict the content of the article of the caption. For example, here, France to transform surplus wine into hand sanitizer. And then students, friends ask, how can they do that? What kind of wine did they use for hand sanitizer, etc. So there is question and answer like this. Another topic here on this, the slides on the right. The learning material here was evaluating the reliability and credibility of a source. You know that sometimes now we can read something, watch something that is not credible and that is not reliable. And then I asked students to post tags on videos that they recently watched and challenge their friends to evaluate the reliability and credibility of that source. And then the class discuss. It's something like this. So a student posted, this is the video that I watched yesterday. And then her friend actually watch and then make evaluation of the video. And then another activity is like a problem-based project. This is also done on Facebook. The purpose was to make the students aware about cultural context. So this is the material of the class. And then students make a survey among their international friends on Facebook, asking about cultural problems they have as a student and how they resolve them. And then students post the results of their survey in the form of pictures like these, pictures and text, and then class comment and ask questions. Okay, I also do like create poll for pairing or grouping the students. So this is what I did once with polling. You are what you eat. You are what you eat. And then choose one of the options. One option can only be chosen by 2 people. There are some 4 votes because they did not read the instruction very carefully. So I use create poll here for grouping the students. Well, like in Zoom, you have room breakout. On Facebook, I also sometimes have group discussion. And then I create different walls for the students like this. So group 1 can discuss here, and then group 2 discuss here, and group 3 discuss here. So the different walls for group work on Facebook is also possible. And then for giving quizzes, exercises, and games, I use Quizzes. This is an application. This tool is also very useful. It's fun. It's like playing a game. You can use it for giving exercises, giving quiz, or just invite the students doing exercises by playing games together. Okay, now the students' response. There are some positive and negative response from the students. The positive ones, it is saving internet quota. Facebook has many features that help facilitate an online class. It's quite simple and easy to use. I'm very comfortable when I know that our class is going to use Facebook. It's interesting because it's first time for me to use Facebook for an online class. The interface of Facebook is familiar for me. Through Facebook group, we can meet all members easily and practically. It's easy to do interactions with friends on Facebook group. I just need to mention his or her name. Interesting because Facebook also provides emoji features, so we can have more expression. Emoji and GIF are the other way for me to express my feeling on friends' posts or other. There are also some negative reactions. The display on Facebook group is not in order, so it is random, and sometimes I have difficulty finding the latest post. It is simple but not comfortable as other social media. Facebook does not have any features such as dark mode. Direct message can help discussing something, but when discussing in a post, it is hard because of privacy. Sometimes they or other friends on Facebook are not responding. And then conclusion and recommendations. During the pandemic, social media such as Facebook, for example, is an alternative tool for online environment. It's user-friendly, So it may help create a non-threatening class atmosphere and reduce anxiety. And even after the pandemic, when we have different levels of technological and digital literacies, using friendly technological tools such as social media may still be relevant. The humanistic approach that stresses on egalitarian and democratic principles, power sharing among teachers and learners seem to support education for whole person. In whatever conditions, during or after the pandemic, having a positive attitude towards our students, respecting them, building good relationship and trust, humbling ourselves as being facilitators instead of the only source of knowledge, may help boost the students' independent learning and confidence. Students with confidence and independence learning skills are in the right path of their education journey to step forward for approaching their self-actualization to be what they really want to be. References, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Bu Martha, for your sharing, and it's very clear how you give the examples of your classes. I believe that we have more examples to our classes now. So now we will proceed to the question and answer session. So there are some questions already here for our speakers. I will start with Sir Galvin. So there is some question for you, sir, now. The first one is, when should we use synchronous and asynchronous? And then if they already do it, is it good practice to ask students to work independently with asynchronous contents, but make them those during class hour? So like they do those things independently, and in the second hour they join the teacher for video conference. So like mixing the asynchronous and synchronous learning. So could you give your insights or
Sure.
experience?
So I think that maybe to address the question, I just want to bring up, because it always helps us when we do decisions like this to think about the criteria. Usually, as I think I did show it in one of the slides, but I know that I had a lot of slides, so sorry about that. But I remember showing the criteria that we often use. And there are really three things that we think about to decide on these things. The first is access. So in the context of your school, what does access look like? For example, I have a friend who is an assistant principal in the United States right now in Maryland. Access is not an issue for them. So in fact, because access is not an issue for them, for their students, they do a lot more synchronous. And in fact, that's one of the models that they do. Like for example, they have a class period, for example, 9 a.m. to 12 noon. The teacher does a synchronous session at 9 a.m. They do some asynchronous sessions, activities in between, and then they end with another synchronous session. So there's actually an emerging form right now called semi-synchronous learning. I saw some articles lately about it, wherein some teachers are saying that using the synchronous to frame the asynchronous activities helps students, most especially those who have a low level of autonomy. So that's the second consideration, learner autonomy. No? So if you look at your learners and you feel like you cannot assume a high level of independent learning among your learners, and you will know this better, then inserting more synchronous actually helps, because framing when, where, when they will actually do the asynchronous activities will actually sort of mimic the going into the classroom that happens in a face-to-face scenario, right? So that's the second criteria, autonomy. So if you feel that your learners are less autonomous based on your understanding or knowledge of them, then definitely inserting more synchronous as long as they have access will help because the teacher is more present in those situations. The teacher will be around while the student is doing the work, and the teacher will be will help actually direct the pace of students if you feel that that direction is necessary. The third and I think important criteria is the task that you want them to do. So for example, I think a lot of our other speakers today gave very clear examples of this, that if the task involves, let's say, absorbing new information, what we know from learning sciences and research on learning is that it takes time to do that. So for example, what we're doing right now is not necessarily the best way if I want you to be experts eventually in the content that I'm telling you about, right? In fact, if cognitive activity is the expectation is high level of cognitive activity, then maybe those are activities that belong more in asynchronous learning. No? So I think thinking about things in those three criteria has been helpful for us. Maybe for those of you wondering whether you should do synchronous or asynchronous, you could think of those three things: so, access, autonomy, and the nature of the task. And depending on your answers to those three criteria, I think that will lead you to the decision whether to do it more synchronously or asynchronously. But I do understand the situation presented that synchronous sessions can actually be management tools also for us teachers. Um, but again, you always defer to the kind of learners that you have. Like I'm not so sure if that model will work for, let's say, my graduate students right now because they're all working, and for them they appreciate more time on their hands, more asynchronous, so that they will be able to do it in their allocated time and not necessarily in a class schedule. If you're talking about, let's say, undergrad students, and most of them or all of them are full-time students, maybe asking them to do things within a class schedule might be appropriate or might be helpful. So I think these decisions should always be taken in a particular context and not in absolutes, I think. No? So I was able to clarify the answer.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Yeah, sometimes we really like have to make sure when it is good for synchronous and asynchronous and think deeper how we perform it and design it for the students. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank
And
you.
there is another question here for you. How would you suggest to organize a class with different standard of students level? So we have to facilitate differentiated teaching and learning process and product.
Yeah.
This is because students with low technology literacy from other islands that cause them to have less motivation in doing distance learning. Thank you.
Sure. Can I, maybe just to, okay, I won't share my slide anymore in the interest of time. But if you remember the triangle that I showed a while ago, I think that's where this becomes relevant. And I think this might be a discussion that will be better school-wide or department-wide rather than classroom-wide. And I say that because the reality is in online learning, as you shift from one modality to another, it takes a lot of time, right? I'm sure that that's the elephant in the room. That before I was able to create like an 8-hour module, or before Miss Martha was able to create her course that students engaged in, it took a lot of time to look for all of these tools, to select what will be appropriate, to think of these activities. So I think that as a department, as a school, maybe it's important that you decide on your base layer. So for example, if you remember in my sharing, I started with Ateneo's decision for the base layer to be online learning modality, which means that that's where we will start. We will start to design online, and then we will make provisions for, let's say, printed modules or offline modules for some students. And that's really coming from research, from a survey that we made to find out what access looks like for our students. Now, if, for example, if students in your particular department or in your particular school, if what you find out is different, for example, what you find out is the assumption is that most students actually do not have access, while you have some students who will be okay with a fully online scenario, then that means that your base layer might be different, that your base layer might be that low bandwidth layer. And then for students who have access, you can create provisions for them to add on to their learning experience. So I think it's important to think of it with the data. So if, let's say, in your class, most of them do not have access, then my suggestion is plan for that lower layer and then just make provisions for the other layers or the upper layers, meaning more technology tools, more online. But if it's the other way around, still plan, I think, for the online, but make small provisions for those. So for example, I think Miss Martha mentioned this a while ago, making sure that students are able to download, for example, download the materials, so that if they're offline, they can still look at the materials. So things like that help. Um, and then one thing that we're realizing that also helps is that if you have things like that, you have to explicitly tell students that those are available. Because I don't know about you, but I've encountered a lot of students who will ask questions before thinking, right? Before actually doing things on their own and exploring, they'll just ask the question, even if it's already there in their faces, so to speak, right? So much like us that we're also navigating this new space, our students are also getting used to it, this new learning environment. So if we make these provisions, I think it's important that we announce it to students. So for example, to really explicitly tell them, for example, in your course, that if you are offline, you can actually download the materials and view it offline. So even if it sounds very obvious to us, sometimes the tendency is they don't think about it, mainly because maybe they haven't done it before. But hopefully, as we go into more online learning, they'll get used to it a little more. They will have more set routines. But at the onset, I think the transparency between teachers and students is important.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank
And
you.
I think what you did in Ateneo with Father Johnny to train all the teachers is really something to prepare the online learning, right?
Yes, yes. So yeah, it took a lot of effort, to be honest. We've been training teachers for around 3 months now.
Wow.
We have around 1,000 teachers who were training from different Ateneo schools and Jesuit schools. Like we run webinars every week like this to add on to their knowledge and experience, and for the community to also come together to exchange ideas and ask questions. So yeah, it is a lot of effort. But one thing that we also that also inspires us or continues to inspire us in our work is community. That I think it's the community that will really make it happen. That teachers working together, teachers being open to sharing resources with each other. So for example, if you're an administrator here, that's one of the things that you may want to really consider. How can you create that community of helping each other? Because we'll never have the answers to everything. We'll never be 100% prepared. So
Yeah.
you need a group of people who you can turn to and say, that's okay. Maybe I can help you. Let's help each other.
Yes. Thank you very much for your answer and also uh, the experience you shared to us in Ateneo. So I will move now to Professor Iwan. There is a question for you, sir. To what extent the tolerance of ambiguity and certainty can be accepted in today's crisis? And then in science and mathematics learning, even in face-to-face meetings, the misconceptions can happen. How could we anticipate or overcome it in online learning?
Thank you. Yes, that's a difficult question to answer. What I perhaps I will give you a context of that. You remember at the beginning of the pandemic, some religious people saying that don't worry, God will protect me. You know that that's the absolutism. The
Yes.
absolutism. On the other hand, we see that even religious institution like Mecca, for example, in Saudi Arabia, stop the pilgrimage and then spraying disinfectant into the holy area. So the question is, God does not protect them. So right, that's important to see the life issue not black and white like that. Some are ambiguous. Okay, some we cannot rely on absolutism always, even in mathematics, in science, I think we stress, we misperceive that mathematics is absolute. It's not actually. There are many aspect on that. Okay, and it's not as absolute as lay people see that 2 + 2 is 4, always 4. It's not always like that. I think it is important now. We can see that we have to have plural thinking. This is important, but perhaps we need another opportunity to discuss that. But I think, yes, I agree, totally agree with that, even in mathematics. So in mathematics science, I think previously we stressed too much on formula, for example, then we didn't have time to argue, to criticize the formula. We did not have time to for being skeptics into the formula. So I think it's a good time now. We can see life more in context now. See that, and we can see that the absolutism really not the right way to go now. And yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Thank you very much, sir, for your explanation. Yeah, I know how it's difficult in science and math because I'm also teaching there. So we really have a lot of struggles
I
there.
think in social science and humanity, I think there are no difficulty, I think, with that, because the nature of the discipline already plural. But in science and math, I think it's it's not that easy. But it is. We have to nurture the plural thinking as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you very much, sir, for your explanation and emphasize in
Oh yeah,
the
there is
plural
one,
aspect.
Miss Alfiani asking about the. There is a private question.
Oh yeah.
Teaching liberal arts. Yes, this is a good question. In my opinion, the in particular in liberal arts, rhetoric. I think the word rhetoric now in modern life becoming so negative, right? For people, but I think it is important. We can see that now how to argue, how to convince people, that's becoming important. Even for the government now, how to convince people to wear masks, to wash their hands. It's becoming important tool now in this pandemic. So I think I agree that liberal arts must be done. Don't forget about liberal arts. It is important. Thank you, Ms. Debbie.
Thank you, sir. Now I will proceed to Mrs. Martha. There are 2 questions for you, Bu Martha. The first one is, there is a lecturer here asking you, many students of mine and subjects of my study experience unstable state of emotions due to the pandemic for various reasons. In your experience, how does humanistic approach cater or facilitate students' emotional well-being?
Oh, okay. Okay. Actually, the most important characteristic in a humanistic approach is that situation must be non-threatening. So you know that tools are just tools, instrumental. So when the tools are difficult to learn, how can students learn? So actually, I choose tools that students are already familiar. So for example, like the main platform, I use Schoology, because all students are familiar with that even before the pandemic. And also I use Facebook because everybody has Facebook account already. And the students seem to be very happy. When I know that we are going to use Facebook, I'm very happy. So they feel secure. Oh, this is not something difficult. And I think that is very important. So you have to use tools that students are familiar, that is not threatening. And you know that the situation during the pandemic is already stressful in itself. Yeah. So we should not add the students' stress with our classes that are not friendly. So that is why I emphasize in the first few minutes to say like hi and then greet one another. And actually when I develop a WhatsApp group, many students sometimes do not ask questions in the group, but they ask to me privately. I often remind them, please use the group so that I will not repeat the same answer. And but still, they contact me privately. But I think this is, I could say that this is emergency situation. So sometimes I also accommodate that kind of thing. And then it's also very important that we are not judgmental because we do not know the situations of the students. They may have internet problem or they may have financial problems, so they cannot buy internet data, or they might, some of them live in villages, because when I do WhatsApp a video call with her, I saw trees and then it's like a forest. And then I asked, where are you? Oh, this is my house. It's in a very small village and the internet connection is sometimes not very good. Okay, so I use something that is non-threatening, and then I also have to have like a non-judgmental attitude to my students. We always have to think positively towards our students. When students do not submit assignment, do not just judge that, oh, you are lazy, because we do not know the problems. Yeah? And when I accommodate also students chatting me privately through my WhatsApp, then they open their problems to me. Oh, this is my situation. Would you like to give me a second chance to submit? Because at that time I have very low connection and I did not manage submitting this long video. It's something like that. So it's very important that we choose instrument that is familiar, that is not, because the tools is just tools, it's not the main thing. And then the most important that learning happens.
Thank you, Bu, for your explanation. There is the last question for this Q&A sessions for Bu Martha. So there is someone asking about your Facebook benefit for the new generation learners in Indonesia that you shared a while ago. She asked about, would similar ripple effective if we use this with international class students where they maybe have privacy issues?
Okay, so as I said that I create a Facebook closed, so only members of my class and me as the administrator can see the activities on Facebook. So it's very different when I make it open. Yeah. And many of my students say, oh, I'm not confident enough to post this this chat or this work, yeah, on a open Facebook. So I use a closed Facebook, and I think another social media like Instagram does not have that kind of feature. So that's why I use Facebook, although actually most of my students actually prefer Instagram. They say, oh, all of my Facebook friends now are not active. And I need to also log in again because I have lost my account and things like that. But the feature that it has closed group, I think it is to secure that they have privacy. But they are not afraid that they will feel embarrassed or things like that.
Okay. Thank you, Bu, for your answer. All participants, I'm so sorry because of the limitation of the time. We cannot answer all of the questions you posted in the chat room, but I hope what the speakers explained a while ago, it will give you more insights and can answer your questions. And now I would like to thank you very much for all the keynote speakers, for Mr. Galvin, Mr. Iwan, and also Mrs. Martha for your inspiring sessions. I believe that all of us can get the benefit, and this webinar is very useful for all of us. Thank you very much for sharing to us. And now I will invite the representative of United Board, Dr. Angela Wei Sing Wong, the Vice President for Programs, to give the closing remarks for this webinar. Dr. Wong, time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pak Mambu, for opening this particular seminar for us and all the speakers, Gavin, Iwan, and Martha. I think one of the good thing about pandemic is that we can use webinars to communicate. And it actually helped us to reach farther and also far, because I feel that if we are not using this technology, we may not be attending so many wonderful lectures and sharings. Although, I mean, some of us worried about being a Zoom mice. That's a term I heard, that we have been living on the Zoom too much. But in fact, I learned so much at the same time. And even from hearing from the three of you, I learned a lot. Thank you so much. That's one thing I feel that the WPEA has really been useful, because we bring whole person education to the center of our thinking about teaching and learning. It's not that the United Board created the term. We're just using some concepts that has been developed for a long time in history, but bringing it back to the center of our attention in higher education, I think is something that is challenging, because all of you would know that the higher education environment has changed so much. I think I will talk about that we have been so much concentrated on intellectual competitiveness or competence, chasing ranks, and forget about what we are actually meant to do, teachers and researchers and people in our community among students. So I think whole person education really put us back to think very seriously about it. And the challenge also come from technology. But I think the three of you brought it so beautifully together that like Galvin, I heard you many times, well, not many times, but several times. And every time I was so impressed that you have been so skillful and tried so creative in bringing a online course together. But I heard you very strongly this time about presence, teachers' presence. It's really important, especially in this time. And you're not just talking about it, you're really put it into the design of your course. And Iwan, I think I'm very impressed. This is the first time I heard you and I met you, and I was thoroughly impressed by a scientist thinking in you, and that you emphasize on intellectual humility. It's not just for a scientist to say that. I think every one of us has to do that. But you're putting it in the context. Why we have to see the different disciplines which have so badly compartmentalized for a long time, but we have to see eye to eye with one another's discipline and learn from one another and bring the two camps, so to speak, the science and the humanities together. And that's a really a observation or insight you made out of your care for what is happening in the world. You mentioned all these problems about tribalism, racism, polarization that we all face in all of our societies. And Martha, I was really touched by your careful choice of tools. Although we all know that we do not need to depend on high technology, that's what Galvin commented also. But I think it's the process. You try to think through what will be non-threatening to the students. I think that's just the wonderful heart of a teacher. I'm also very impressed by Palmer's book about teachers teach ourselves, right? Teacher teach who they are. I think you, all three of you have demonstrated that very, very, very well, very strongly that you are teachers who care for students, who care for real learning, who care for where the students are. I mean, I heard so much that try to meet students where they are. I think that that's the kind of spirit that we would like to support, and I really congratulate all of you and Debbie and Pap Mabu and also the other institutions who bring this together. This is the only conclusion I can make. I'm thoroughly impressed, and I hope that the spirits will live on and will continue to spread. And United Board is very much supportive of this, and just let Hope know what you wanted to do further on this regard. Thank you again, and congratulations, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Mom Angela. Thank you very much. On behalf of the committee, I also want to thanks a lot for United Board to support us in doing this webinar. This webinar comes from our struggle and our desire to integrate whole person education in our education, even in online environment that we face now. And thank you very much for United Board that always supported us until now. So we are now in the end of our webinars. I'm sure that all of us have great moment on this webinar. May this webinar give us light and spirit to walk in the meaningful education journey, especially in the midst of current pandemic. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to give the greatest honor for all the keynote speakers for their insights and sharing. I would like to also appreciate the great support of the United Board and the alumni of Whole Person Education Academy on this webinar series. Thank you too for all the participants who joined us today and last week. We apologize for uncomfortable things might happen during this webinar. And now you can get the exit ticket in the chat room. Please fill it up and submit it today by 4 p.m. Western Indonesia time or 5 p.m. Manila or Hong Kong time. The exit ticket is for your attendance and e-certificate. And all the materials, surely with the certificate, will be sent to your email in the couple of days. And for my closing, I would like to ask us, let's embrace this crisis, especially in education, by building the bridge together as we cross it. Thank you very much and see you again. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless everyone.
God bless you too. Hello, Ma'am Wai Ching.
Yeah, hello, Elvi.
Selamat siang, Pak Iwan. Kenalan, saya teman Bapak di Facebook.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, sir. Mom, thank you very much. you still have time, the committee or the speakers, maybe just stay in this room for a while so we can close in the prayer.